We are Rogue Media Sports.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is time for another edition of the Doomsday podcast, and very fortunate to be coming to you tonight as we tape this just hours after the game, just a couple hours after the game, and Ed Werder has been able to not only attend the ball game, sat out there in the stands, a rare thing for Ed Werder. In fact, he's worked so long covering the NFL, something like this has not happened. It's been many, many years, and Ed, I want you to put a number on that for me, but I do want to tell people where we are, coming to you from Frito Nation Productions. He does a wonderful job, Mark Frito Friedman, and this is the Doomsday Podcast. We got a lot to get to in this one, including Jerry Jones bullying Roger Goodell and basically saying, as long as this is going on, we're going to jam you up on this contract extension. Ed has details on that, but Ed, your first visit to an NFL game, sort of as a fan. Now, I hesitate to say that because I promise you didn't have any Denver or Cowboys gear on out there going crazy, but you did have your wife with you. You sat out in the stands. You bought your tickets. You got your parking pass. What was your experience like?
Yeah, this was my first NFL game as a fan since 1972 when my father took my brother and I to see what proved to be a significant, historic game during the only perfect season in NFL history. Bob Greasy broke his ankle as we watched from the stands against the Chargers. And you're right. So this was my first NFL game. It's a weird experience because, you know, I've been trained over time to be objective and professional and, you know, behave accordingly at games. And that's perfectly acceptable and even expected when you're in the press box. But it makes you seem kind of odd when you're sitting out in the stands surrounded by passionate fans on both sides. And some of them recognize you, and they're trying to determine if you're for their team or for the other team. So they're trying to provoke a response that you have no intention of ever giving them. So it's a weird experience. And then, of course, we endured a 62-minute rain delay.
Ooh.
And I think this was really unfair. You know, it started raining big drops. And so while I was watching the game, my wife, Jill, sitting beside me, said, why don't I go to the pro shop and get us a couple of ponchos? And I said, that's a great idea. So she grabs $20 and grabs the bag. And I said, you might want to take more than that. She said, I'm not paying more than that. I said, well, you come back with 2 ponchos. I don't care what it costs. So she comes back. We put these ponchos on. They're only $5 a piece, as it turns out.
Nice.
But then we no sooner get these things on to protect us against the rain and look like some of the smartest people among the 75,000 in the stands, subject to the random developments of nature. And what happens? They force us out of the seats and into the concourse where we're covered. I should get a full refund. Why should I pay for ponchos if you're not going to let me sit in the rain now?
Well, the sun did come out, so when you come back out in your poncho. Now, for folks, we'll figure out how to put this on the Doomsday Podcast page, pictures of Ed in his poncho at the ball game. And I bet that was a strange thing for fans out there who recognized you as your usual place down on the field before games, doing those reports for ESPN. They wondered, oh my gosh, Ed Werder's up here sitting. What's he up to? Were there some encounters with fans? Were they kind? Were they appreciative to kind of see you out among the common folks?
There were some double takes. Some people definitely recognized me. I think the goatee sort of makes you infinitely recognizable. Like, whereas before, people might think that I look like somebody. They see me in public and they think that's me and they Google me. But now kind of very few people have the goatee and the glasses. So that kind of is a dead giveaway. But yes, they were very kind. They asked me to take some pictures with them. I was more than happy to accommodate them. except Dan Graziano. I didn't take a picture with him. He was working the game for ESPN.
Yes.
But yeah, it was fun. We bought our tickets, so I didn't compromise my professionalism or my objectivity, which I mentioned previously. And Peter King, our friend at the Monday Morning Quarterback, asked me to send him a few observations, and the first one I sent him was observation number one: even when you're in the stands and you're sitting in the sunshine, and you notice the equipment managers from the Cowboys sideline rush into the locker room and come out with an armful of rain jackets for the coaching staff, it is going to rain. Get ready. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, it's a power pack show, and it was a brutal effort and loss for the Dallas Cowboys out there. They lose 42-17. Frito, I believe before Ed's already fired up. You can feel the emotion in his voice. Before we break this down from every angle, play the music, sir. And here it is, the Doomsday podcast, ready to go again in week 2 of the season. And Ed Werder, who, as we just talked about, right there, our man on the scene, was in the stands today, somehow was able to make it after the game in pretty quick fashion. I would guess that Ed might have left a few minutes early, seeing that it was a lopsided game even fairly early there in the fourth quarter. But Ed's made it back to a secure location and has a good line. Whatever we're talking to you on, Ed, you sound good. We'll let you know if there's anything that changes on that front, but you sound great. Ed, my thought, the first thing I want to talk about, and then at some point I want to get you to weigh in on this Jerry news that hit this morning before the games and some of those preview shows and ESPN report. Two of our friends from ESPN put that report out, and I know you've gathered some more details on Jerry and Jerry's involvement in perhaps jamming up the commissioner on his him seeking the contract extension that seemed to be a formality, but now has been delayed perhaps by one Jerry Jones. Now, Ed, I would say this. Let's start with the fact that the Cowboys go on the road, first road game this year, and just get absolutely humiliated. And I think, so much of the buildup to this season, and even in the season, has been all about Zeke Elliott. Let's start right there. You were at the game. You're sitting up there. I was able to kind of see where you were seated. You had really nice tickets at this venue, and it seems like a pretty loud place. I don't know if it's quite as loud as Seattle, but I know it can get loud there. And Zeke from the start. Now, let's remember the offense, when the game was still somewhat competitive, was basically never on the field. I mean, it was 3 and out a lot of the time, and they weren't out there for that long because they really couldn't put anything together. But Zeke Elliott, this is really the first time. He was bottled up a little bit against the Giants in the first game of his career last season, only ran for about 50 yards. Ed, this was the first time we've ever seen him, as a guy who put up enormous yardage last year, just get completely shut down. From your view and looking at this, how alarmed should Cowboys fans be? Because, Ed, you've been driving. I'll just tell you on Twitter, on the Dallas Morning News website that I'm still writing for, people are reacting in a very vicious type manner. What was your read on what the Broncos were able to do against Zeke in that running game?
Well, I think the thing that you have to be mindful of is the Broncos recently have been one of the best defensive teams in football. And even though, they fired Wade Phillips, they are strong on the defensive side of the ball in terms of coaching staff and personnel. They brought in Vance Joseph, who was an outstanding defensive coach with the Cincinnati Bengals. Broncos tried to hire him actually before they hired Wade Phillips as their defensive coordinator. And then failing that, they did hire him as a head coach when he became available on Adam Gase's Miami staff. And then they promoted Joe Woods, who had been their secondary coach under Wade, to create some continuity. And they have a lot of unique talent on the defensive side of the ball. We saw toward the end of the game that Von Miller, again, is one of the best pass rushers in all of football. And he's a guy you have to build your whole game plan around. or he'll destroy the game on you single-handedly. And for 3 quarters, they handled him reasonably well. The part that I think that really came to bear for the Broncos is their unique secondary, the no-fly zone. They have Chris Harris, who's a great cover guy. They used him an awful lot in the slot on Cole Beasley to take away the guy that Dak relies heavily on in those third down situations to create mismatches the other way. And then they have Aqib Talib, who was able to handle Dez Bryant much of the day. Gave up a touchdown, also scored a touchdown on a 103-yard return late in the game. So I don't think there are a lot of teams that can thwart Dallas defensively like this team did, and to a certain degree like the Giants have done. They did it twice last year and almost as well in the season opener this year. They just got no offensive support. But this was the worst by far offensive performance of the Dak Zeke era. No question about it. 9 carries, 8 yards for Zeke Elliott, whose worst game you alluded to was his very first NFL game against the Giants. He had 51 yards. Dak Prescott, sets the interception streak for the NFL. Fewest interceptions in first 500 passing attempts, but throws 2 picks in this game, including his first pick six. So it was a bad game all around for the Cowboys, but I would not be overly concerned about that fact at the moment. I think they're going to redeem themselves. And next week, Arizona's a pretty good defensive team. They're not a good offensive team, so I think Dallas will probably figure something out there. But this was a bad game, and like Dak Prescott said after the game, when I play like that, we're not going to win very many games. And clearly, the Broncos forced the Cowboys to rely more on the quarterback than they like to.
He was off, and I think he has the kind of confidence that he will be able to bounce back from this. But to watch this vaunted offensive line, and so much has been made about how, oh my gosh, the best in the NFL, and I do think it's for the most part a solid offensive line. But Ed, you saw and you experienced, and I don't know how much it had to do with crowd noise, how much it had to do with the lack of discipline. There were false start penalties. There was holding, of course. That didn't have anything to do with the sound in the stadium. There was a thought that going into this game, they were asking the Cowboys about, are you ready to do silent count, that kind of thing. And all the Cowboys to a man were, and this was talked about in the Fox broadcast today, well, Dak has so much poise that won't impact him, having to go to silent count. You being there in that stadium and sort of seeing how the crowd was reacting and all, do you feel like that noise got to the Cowboys and affected them, and then even was maybe part of why Dak had such a miserable day, especially by his standards of his great rookie season?
Well, I think there's a reason that the Broncos have won 19 of their last 20 games at home and have one of the best records in the NFL at home over the last 10 years. And that's because the crowd does become a factor in the game. And you could definitely sense that where I was sitting. In a lot of stadiums in the NFL, the fans get more engaged when their team has the ball. And in Denver, because of their significant defensive history, the Orange Crush, the no-fly zone most recently, really they won that last Super Bowl with the best defense in football. They get more engaged when the team's on defense, and they know that can be a negative influence for the opposing team, and they were. But I could see that, I think I mentioned this, Joe Woods, a defensive coordinator, had told me last week one of the things we've worked on with our defensive packages is to make it harder for quarterbacks to operate against us at the line of scrimmage. And that's what Dak was trying to do. And I think it's definitely possible that the offensive line does not get off the ball as well, as fast, and as coordinated a fashion as it would under better circumstances, either at home or in a venue that's noise is not as big a factor as it is here. But yeah, I mean, the Cowboys were out of the game early and out of sync and, behind, and that's just not their formula. I mean, their formula is not to have Zeke Elliott run the ball 9 times and Dak Prescott to throw 50 passes. And that's what happened in this game. They got behind, and they wound up having to put, their second preferred method of moving the football, the passing game, up against what the Broncos do best, defend the pass with a pass rush like Von Miller and, a pretty strong secondary that still has 3 of the 4 members of the no-fly zone back there. So I just think that it was a bunch of factors that came into play. Noise was certainly a part of it. definitely interrupted the Cowboys' ability to execute, and they just were not themselves, and they didn't get the chance to play the game the way they wanted to play it.
Do you feel like that Roger Goodell had reached out to the Broncos in that defense and basically said, I can't get an injunction or this week. Can you help me enforce this suspension? Do you think? Well,
I think when you carry 9 times for 8 yards, I think Jerry will now campaign to have the league consider this Zeke's first game under suspension.
Jerry,
since he wasn't much of a factor anyway, let's let this one count as game 1 of the 6-game suspension.
I think he could make a convincing argument on that. It was you talk about futility. I was trying to think as I was writing about this game afterwards, and I know you've been reflecting on it, of the Garrett era. Now, you remember, since he's taken over, I'm trying to remember, was he already the head coach that time the New Orleans Saints had like 78 first downs or something, just insane amount? I mean, there have been some humiliating type defeats, but now as far as just thorough domination, this
is the third worst score based on score, or score discrepancy. The third worst of the Jason Garrett era.
Okay, but as far as the eye test, it's about one of the worst in terms of just getting manhandled. In fact, that Shaq Barrett, and you're familiar with his work, Ed. Former Colorado State player from up in your part of the country, and it was funny. I kept getting. Because it was 48 and 58, I kept thinking, wait, is that Vaughn? And no, I'd be like, oh, no, that's Shaq. And
yeah, they do look similar.
They were like both racing in there. And then, of course, you have Wolf, who's been around there for a little bit. And then who's the other guy they brought in? Pekka? How do we say? Is that how we say his name?
The interior defensive lineman.
My goodness, yeah, the man with the great hair. He was jamming everything up. So it was domination. That was a nice little back and forth going on between Talib, the man from Richardson Berkner High School here in the Dallas area, against, and that's where Frito, that's where our producer went, by the way, versus Dez. I thought there was some good back and forth going on there. Dez got him once. And then, of course, Talib late in the game pretty much said goodnight to the Cowboys. I almost think it's better that way, Ed. There was part of me at that point, if the Cowboys had have somehow made that, like 35-24, and that would have allowed Garrett to have this sort of, what he would have clung to. They kept fighting. We never gave up. I liked how he sort of tried to climb back into the game. You don't deal with reality when you have that kind of a response. And so I think it's almost better, maybe in the long run for this team, that they went ahead and had the big blowout, because they certainly earned that blowout. Now, a couple of plays before we get to some of the defense. There was two plays I want to hit you with. And you're there. Ed Werder was right there at the stadium. Xavier, the X-Man. Woods, the rookie out of Louisiana Tech. Now, there you're watching Chris Jones, who had a great performance against the Giants. End zone. Okay, so there you are. You're watching this. And Chris Jones, Cowboys punter, may be the best player on the team right now. He puts a beautiful kick up there, lets it land at about, 10, 5-yard line, right in there, exactly where you want a punter to put the ball, and gets the hang time for the young X-Man to get down there and wait on it. And Ed, if he doesn't, this was a sign of things to come to me. This is a flip the field position, pin them back there, see what you can do. Lawrence had been incredibly active fairly early in that game, and that guy goes wandering into the end zone. Could you figure out what he was doing? Did he literally lose track of where he was? Did he think?
I think he must have, because initially he did exactly the right thing, and he stopped right at the goal line and turned and faced the ball. But then before it bounced, or as it bounced, he went in the end zone and then tried to knock it back into the field of play where he had just been standing. It made absolutely zero sense.
Did you see the officials? They were so they were confused by the whole situation.
They were flummoxed, as we like to say. Flummoxed is what they were.
They didn't know what was going on, and it took them a second to go ahead and say, because they're like, what was that guy doing? Now, that was one play. A bigger play. about 6:38 left in the first half. So we're there in the second quarter. You're back out there after the weather delay. You got your poncho, but now the sun's come back out. And the Cowboys are going to end up, McManus does go ahead and make that field goal. It's going to put them up 10-7. And Lawrence has been doing some good things. So we're going to hold him to a field goal there. And I think Lawrence had just got another sack. He'd had that nice defensive play, and so puts them back there. They got to attempt, I believe, about a 50-yard field goal, which McManus, as you do in that thin air, hits the field goal. Well, meanwhile, Lawrence is called for basically using leverage. It's a new point of emphasis by officials, using leverage of the opposing player to kind of hoist himself up into the air. And Ed, I don't know, if they were showing that much in the stadium, sometimes you can get good replays, but I don't know how much you got to see that one. It really looked like it didn't help him at all, and that ended up being a pretty significant play.
It doesn't matter if it ended up in allowing him to block a kick or not. You cannot use another player to vault yourself into the backfield on a special teams kick. The league has just determined that, and the coaches really supported that. It's a very dangerous play. It's a play that could easily end in somebody, fracturing their spine or breaking their neck and suffering a really significant injury that nobody wants to see happen on an NFL football field. And so that play has been legislated out, and so they're going to call it, very carefully. If they see anything that resembles an attempt by a player to do that, they're going to draw the flag. And you're right, it was a pivotal point in the game because the defense had made a stop and had gotten them off the field with the minimum amount of damage, 3 points, and instead gives them a first down. They wind up scoring a touchdown.
Yeah, and really, other than never look back. I mean, Cowboys thought maybe they had gotten a foothold when they scored at the end of the half. Dak seemed kind of excited at that point, like, hey, we're moving it a little bit, maybe got some rhythm, 21-10, and then, Ed, they come back out at the second half, the Broncos do, and put together one of those mind-numbing, life-sucking drives that the Cowboys never recovered from. And it was it 6 consecutive third down conversions? I mean, it was a remarkable thing. Even 3rd and 11, it did not matter. 3rd and 5, there was a 3rd and 4, there was a 3rd and 3 in there. It did not matter. The down
and a 12-yard run on 3rd and 11. The Cowboys gave up a 12-yard run to C.J. Anderson on where he reversed the field on 3rd and 11 and converted that even. And yeah, I mean, Trevor Siemian's a good player in that league, and the Broncos, I think, believe that he's a top 20 quarterback who maybe can be a top 15 quarterback, and if he's that and they can run the football and play great defense, then that's the formula that they need to have success and try to get back to a division championship and win a Super Bowl again. And I think he's an underrated player, but for him to be as accurate as he was and to throw 4 touchdown passes, I think they knew that they had a great advantage with both of their outside receivers. So it wasn't a surprise to me that they were able to have success throwing the ball outside. The surprise to me was that the Cowboys couldn't at all defend the run. That C.J. Anderson had 118 yards rushing against a defense that, as bad as it was last year, never gave up a single 100-yard rushing game to an individual. And now week 2, they've done that in Denver. And I thought, for the most part, Denver's a team that was coming off a Monday night game and had a short week to prepare. And the Cowboys really looked like the team that was struggling with some, challenges in that regard. Like they weren't very well prepared for this particular matchup and didn't handle the elements, whether the noise, whether it's the altitude, which can be a factor early in the season for a team that, maybe doesn't have a lot of depth because players get fatigued. They've only been playing a quarter with the exception of the regular season openers. And so they're not conditioned to be playing 60 and 70 snaps in a single game as they were forced to do today. But the Cowboys had an advantage of an extra day of preparation that the Broncos didn't have, and yet the Broncos really dominated the game in every single phase.
All right, I want to throw a theory by you, and I think there might be some genius to this, but you'll be the judge, and Frito can weigh in on this as well. I think if this has become, and maybe, Denver's always used this to their advantage. They put how much they're above sea level. They put that prominently up at the stadium, so players will think about this. Ed, I was trying to think, where was our highest point in Texas? But it occurs to me that the Cowboys could, if they ever have to do this again, and early in the season go play at Denver, and as Aikman said, well, they have soft camps now. All these teams have soft camps, and they're not ready for this type of altitude this early in the season. University of New Mexico, or maybe go to wherever New Mexico State is, up in Las Cruces. Ed, what do you think if the Cowboys spent the week of preparation at a higher altitude, actually conditioning their lungs and everything for the altitude to go play against a team that apparently almost never loses in the first 2 games of the season at home?
I would say that they would probably think that's too disruptive to their players and their normalcy that coaches so covet, and they wouldn't want to put more emphasis and preparation into any one game than they would another. And for that very reason, I think that would be unappealing to Jason Garrett and the coaching staff. They rarely do things to that extreme in the NFL. You could have your whole camp in a place like that, but obviously they've never chosen to do that. And I think it's a real thing, first of all. There's a reason that Olympic caliber athletes, runners in particular, go train at altitude, right? When there's an Olympics in Mexico City or someplace else, they take that seriously in a way that football teams just don't. They just try to rely on rotating people in. And obviously the Cowboys think they have good depth on their defensive line, even though DeMontre Moore and David Irving are not there. They're still suspended. Moore will come back this week. But I think they felt like they could control reps with their depth. They were certainly aware of what the Chargers did, because I talked to some coaches about that very component in this game. The Chargers I mentioned, I was on the sideline covering it for Westwood One, and they opened their second defensive series, and none of the 4 defensive line starters were in the game when the second series began, including Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa. So right away they started with a rotation to prepare for that very eventuality, that would over time take its toll. I don't know how much the Cowboys ultimately had to do that, because I think the game got away from them pretty quickly.
Yeah. And as we talk about the defense on the Doomsday podcast, Ed, there were some guys. Now, I'm a big Malik Collins fan. He had his moments, but for the most part, he was one of the players that was just getting moved around. The Cowboys they caught them in such wrong. I was kind of looking at Marinelli, and then I was watching the Cowboys, and they were doing a lot of, there was some movement right before the snap, and it was like wherever they moved, they would just basically move themselves out of the proper running lane. And, for instance, Taco Charlton against the run is a scary thing. I mean, they are moving him right on out of the picture. And then, unlike pretty much his whole career, Sean Lee was missing tackles today. It's a bad sign when he's missing tackles. Our buddy Jalen Smith also missing tackles. And then I have a problem with his safety. And I know he made one really nice play. And actually, I think he caused a fumble at one point as well on a special teams play on the kickoff. But so Jeff Heath does some nice things. But here's one thing that that really bothers me about Jeff Heath. Like, this is with some other safeties across the league. This man is not happy unless he is trying to deliver the greatest hit in any NFL game each week. And so he's always going for the explosive, jarring hit instead of just making the tackle. And that's a problem, because Anderson was running his tail off, and he was just bouncing off of those types of tackles, and it really hurt the Cowboys today on several fronts, that they were not wrapping up in tackling.
Right. And I agree. with a lot of that analysis. But for me, the Cowboys are a team that wins with offense, and the offense is the part of the team that failed to perform to expectations today, and that's why they lost the game. I mean, yeah, the defense wasn't great, but the Cowboys' only touchdown drives followed turnovers created by the defense, and those possessions were 3 yards and 39 yards. So as few points as the Cowboys scored, both of their touchdowns came after the defense created easy scoring opportunities for them. And to me, it was really, the Cowboys had one rushing first down. They were outgained, 178 yards to 40 on the ground. Mm-hmm. So to me, to put this result on the defense would be somewhat unfair. They did create a couple of opportunities. They did allow the 2 touchdowns that the offense did score were the result of turnovers. And I think the Cowboys know they're not going to win very many games on defense. They've got to win the game on offense, and they weren't even really competitive on that phase of the game against the Broncos.
Yeah, it was I know it had to be, it was not a pretty thing to watch in person, and you were right there on top of all of that, Ed, at what I still call Mile High Stadium. I know it has some other involvement, some more corporate type involvement there, but it was really something to watch. And to me, it sounds like I'm probably, and this isn't shocking to anybody, maybe reacting a little more than you are. You are someone who occasionally brings perspective to the podcast. I don't always do that. I would just say it is pretty alarming that on a rare time when a defense was able to put something together to just completely stifle the run, that the Cowboys couldn't get anything done. And a real good point by you, the fact that the scores that they had, they didn't have to travel far, and at the end, even some of the yardage Dak had was all sort of meaningless late game where he's just trying to chunk it down the field, and the Broncos were allowing some of that. That is embarrassing, especially for a back in Zeke Elliott. Say what you want about Zeke Elliott. He's caused an enormous distraction for this team. Now, they also believe he's one of the better players in the NFL. So they're going to fight for him. Obviously, Jerry has fought for him on several different levels. But to send that kind of all-pro back out there and have him go 9 carries for 8 yards, what you have to guard against and worry about is the carryover. Because now it is in his mind, in the offensive line's mind, and the next team up that you can do this. It is possible to completely short-circuit this offense that is supposed to be one of the most balanced and potent offenses in the NFL.
And what is it the Arizona Cardinals do well? Their next opponent is the Arizona Cardinals next Sunday night. And what is it they have, and what do they do well? They play great defense, right? I mean, that's how they win. And they've got 2 unique players in their secondary, and Patrick Peterson, who might be the best cover corner in football, man-to-man, plays the best receiver every down, every week. And then they've got Tyrann Mathieu, who is a unique defensive back in his ability to play around the line of scrimmage and blitz and pressure quarterbacks, and he catches the ball well, so he's got a lot of interceptions. He's as close to a Charles Woodson-type player in his prime as the NFL has seen. And so that makes them a dangerous team. And exactly for the reason that you just said, they have some of the same personnel advantages that the Broncos brought into this game. And when you get to watch tape of what the Broncos did and what the Giants did the week before, both of them trying to do the same thing, which is commit whatever resources defensively you have to take Zeke Elliott out of the game and force the ball into Dak Prescott's hands. And ultimately, it's worth it. It's worth whatever gamble you have to take to neutralize Zeke Elliott. I think that's what defensive coaches are going to take out of this film.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they'll also I think the Cowboys are going to have to probably do a little better job of knowing what cleats to have out there in a game. And maybe it's just that these receivers were running such great routes. Aikman was really, by the way, Ed, impressed with Emmanuel Sanders and some of the things he was able to accomplish. And a lot of what Troy talked about was the pivot route. And you know what the pivot route is, and the Cowboys were just biting on it, and not only biting on it. Jordan Lewis had this happen to him. Heath had it happen once to him. I saw Jalen slip at one point. They could not keep their footing out there. So, there were just so many things going wrong, and I thought you would find that interesting. By the way, at one point, Troy said of Emmanuel Sanders. Troy's point was, the guys in his day, like Michael and others, just were better route runners. He thinks they're great receivers right now, but they're not as technically sound when it comes to route running. And after watching these pivot routes and all the things that Sanders was doing, Troy said something to the effect of, "I think this is one of the best route runners in the game." So he was pretty
well, he would
impressed.
know.
Yeah,
he would certainly know. Yeah, and he's got amazingly quick feet. And sure hands, and he's a very tough guy to match up with when you're, trying to do all you can to stop Demaryius Thomas from taking over the game, which I thought the Broncos did a really good job early on getting him involved. He didn't have huge numbers, but I think it sort of set things up for the rest of their offense in a way that didn't happen the week before against the Chargers.
Yeah, I think that's right. In that drive we were talking about earlier, where the Cowboy, the first of the second half, that the Broncos just kept converting third downs. I wrote this down. Troy says that the Cowboys' defense is reeling. They don't know what to do. And it really, at that point, I thought it summed it up well. There was a very helpless feeling with, I think part of it is what you said, whether it was altitude or whatever. We've been out here too long. Like, we literally have no answers at this point. And there was not much that could be done. Now they're going to have to put this one behind them, and there's going to be a lot of negative stuff going around on a lot of different fronts. Now, Ed, this is something I wanted to get your take on. You saw the report this morning from our good friend Chris Mortensen and Adam Schefter, and it involved Jerry. And there were some comical parts of this to me. I think you've kind of done your due diligence and may even be able to provide some more of the inner workings. But basically, Jerry, in his, he and Roger Goodell are obviously not in a great place right now. There is in this, for our folks that don't realize this, there's something called the Compensation Committee. And so they make, suggestions and recommendations on what some of these big executives in the NFL should make. And they're the ones that are going to approve Roger Goodell's new contract extension. And a few weeks ago, there was a story that was about to happen. It was very close to happening. There is now, the report this morning was that Jerry has basically made himself the unofficial seventh member of this committee, and that Jerry thinks the offer on the table right now that was being discussed is ridiculous, that he makes too much, and he will try to let him make that back, but he needs to do it on an incentive-based program. By the way, I've had radio executives tell me that when they give me a big pay cut. We'll give you a chance to make this back. You just need to finish in first place for like 27 straight weeks. And I didn't, Ed, I don't want to break any news, but I wasn't able to accomplish that. After you've made some calls and have kind of dialed down on this story today, what have you learned? Well,
the group of owners who have been charged with responsibility for negotiating an extension with Commissioner Roger Goodell includes and is led by Arthur Blank of the Falcons. The other members are Clark Hunt, Robert Kraft, John Mayer of the Giants, Bob McNair of the Texans, and Art Rooney, the second of the Steelers. Now, Jerry has become involved sort of as the representative of the other 26 who are otherwise not included here. Now, this happening obviously against the backdrop of him challenging very vigorously, even though he hasn't said much publicly, Roger Goodell's decision to suspend Zeke Elliott for 6 games. It creates the appearance that that's the reason that Jerry is now opposing this contract extension for Goodell. And, Jerry's made it clear in off-the-record conversations, or so it seems, that that's not the issue. My issue here isn't that he's disciplining my most important player. My issue is his salary is exorbitant and unnecessary, because otherwise Jerry could be accused of being a hypocrite, because he supported Goodell ferociously when Tom Brady's 4-game suspension was announced. And, Robert Kraft fought it, and even afterwards said he regrets that he trusted the NFL to be fair, because he felt ultimately they weren't. Mm-hmm. And now, obviously, Jerry does not feel that Roger Goodell is being fair in the punishment he's administering to Zeke Elliott based on the findings and the facts. What's interesting here is Arthur Blank has allowed Jerry to be involved because I believe he thinks he's less dangerous if he's leading the rest of the group against these other owners than he is if he's included as part of the group, even if it's in an unofficial capacity. At least Jerry believes he's influencing the ultimate decision. And so he's less likely to create opposition that could wreck this whole deal. There are a lot of people who don't think Jerry's as influential in this regard as Jerry may think he is. But that all remains to be seen. But obviously, they're allowing him to be involved so that he doesn't lead an outright rebellion among those who are not officially involved.
And that might be
sort of the old saying: "What keep your opponents, your friends close, and your enemies closer." It's that sort of idea.
I gotcha. It does sound like he and his fellow Texas owner, of course, the owner, Bob McNair of the Texans, are on the same page. There were several anonymous sources basically saying in this story, in this report, one of them basically saying this is an awful deal and, something has to be done. And so you're right. It sounds like there are some of these owners, and how much involvement in I just think, in my mind, as I read the story, Jerry is feeling there was a time when I think that last CBA, when Mara and Kraft were kind of running the show, and I think Jerry actually felt a little left out. I think Jerry got his feet back under him on this whole Los Angeles thing and had such an enormous role in that now he's back kind of, in his mind, running things.
And there are a lot of people in the league who don't like Jerry's role in that. And there are a lot of people in the league who are owners who are a little resentful that Jerry Jones is in the Hall of Fame and Pat Bowlen and some other people aren't. And the timing of the whole thing is interesting, right? Because part of the report was that Goodell was informed that Jerry was becoming an unofficial member of this committee as he was finalizing the decision on disciplining Elliott. Well, that's either a remarkable coincidence or an attempt by Jerry to influence the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that Jerry does believe, and it's going to be hard to change his mind, that the commissioner does not deserve the salary that he's made in recent years. He's made $200 million since he was elected in 2006, and that includes $44 million in 2015. So Jerry does not think that the commissioner, any commissioner, is worth that amount of money. That's over $1 million per team by a significant margin. Now, he does take a lot of criticism for basically doing what the owners want done in running the league. He's obviously an unpopular figure in the NFL in times like these, with the Brady suspension and the Elliott suspension and the botched investigations. And so he takes a lot of criticism that would otherwise be directed at the owners. And that's why they pay him these huge sums of money. I also think, Matt, that the owners have got to unify on this. And I think guys like Robert Kraft will be essential in this regard. They've got to unify themselves because they can't present anything but a united front as they get ready to do a new CBA with the NFLPA. Like, they can't appear that they aren't in agreement on major issues. And one of the things that some owners, like Jerry, don't believe in is they no longer believe that the commissioner should be involved in investigating and disciplining player conduct.
And that is, by the way, while they all in the CBA, this was all agreed to. I think that is one place where Jerry and some of these other owners are correct. And who'd we have on recently? Michael McCann from SI. He made a good point. Roger Goodell really shouldn't even want this much power because obviously it's backfired on him. Now he may make an immense salary, but he's become such an unpopular person that he has not proved to be very efficient nor successful at executing these investigations, even though he has assembled some people with very impressive backgrounds. He has still found a way to leave himself open to second guessing because he simply, from a transparency standpoint and just an overall execution standpoint, has failed time and time again. So,
and Michael McCann is making the point that he's not a lawyer, and so he's expert in a lot of things, but this is not an area where he excels, and so the NFL should find another way that's more fair to the players, that has more trust by the fans, and what that is and whether they do it remains to be seen. It's going to be part of the negotiation. If the players' union wants that, and they're going to make that a priority, and I have my doubts that they will, because this affects such a small percentage of the players in the NFL. Like 99.5%, or maybe even higher than that, of the players in the league never encounter this issue. And so to them, it's like, why? I have a short career as it is. Why should I give up millions of dollars for these guys who put themselves in these predicaments when that's never going to happen to me? So it's a tough sell. And don't forget that this was the attitude the owners endorsed with Goodell when he took over as commissioner. They felt like they wanted to take the game back from the players. And that's exactly the mandate Roger Goodell felt he had from the owners, and that's why he's been so aggressive in these sorts of situations.
Is it time for the owners to all get together, put whatever money, I don't know what it costs these days. I did this years ago, but I don't know what it cost, and send Roger Goodell to law school?
I don't know if he'd be willing to do that. He's made an awful lot of money as it is, as we said.
I think I'd like that. That'd be a good story. Is Roger, by day the NFL commissioner, by night a law student, just to try to get better at this. And I do want to say this one thing. Thanks to our partners, we continue to have all sorts of folks wanting to get involved with us, and we appreciate that. Harry's Razors. I talked to you about that last week, and I got a whole new shipment, and I got to get some out to your house, Ed, and I'll take care of you on this. I'll make sure I send you some out there. I don't want to hog all the razors. Ergonomically, just wonderful, great to the touch on these razors. And then for a guy with sort of sensitive, I'm just a sensitive man, but also sensitive skin. These things are doing a nice job of sort of, I struggle. I cut myself a lot. I'm a cutter.
Intentionally? Did you do this intentionally?
No, but I love Harry's Razors. And listen, the Germans, they make good cars, and they make really nice razors. And they've got some factories, Ed, and I want to visit one of those someday. But they put together a really nice razor, and somebody like you, Ed, who right now is experimenting with sort of a variety of looks. The goatee. The goatee is a good look on you, but as you know, you do have to trim it up occasionally, and so
I do.
The Harry's razor, I think, is going to help in that regard.
I have found that Victor Kayam's product, to speak of an old AFL Patriots owner who was involved with Remington and razors, made his fortune. I much prefer Harry's to that, and I guess most people only wish that with this sponsorship we'd be talking about the Cowboys losing in what was a close shave, but that's not the case.
Oh, that was certainly not the case. And Ed, tremendous stuff as always. Appreciate you being out there kind of in the field for us and your willingness to go to Denver and to be out there and experience that in person. It sounded like it was an interesting time for you. The fans enjoyed interacting with you. Is this something, Ed, you would want to make it a habit of, or are you still more of a guy who really enjoys being up there in the press box with the free food?
Well, and the shelter. Don't forget that. The shelter
right,
is nice.
yeah.
I found myself missing the press box quite a bit when it started to rain and lightning. And I did have to buy. So can I expense my $144 tickets and half of our 2 hamburger, Coke, and French fry lunch that cost $31, or do I have to eat that too?
No, I would suggest sending that to Westwood 1.
Okay.
And
I'll do that.
see if Kevin Harlan and his bunch will take care of that.
Actually, Ed, Matt may take care of the ponchos.
I will cover
$5 ponchos.
I will cover the ponchos. I can't do that.
Well, I will say this. I will say this about the experience. I respect the fans who spend their money and support their team, and they sit out there and they yell for 3 hours for their team, and they stand up, and they're very devoted, and that's not me. That's been coached out of me a long time ago. I think football is a great television experience, and if you're going to be there, the press box is the place I'd like to be.
Do you? By the way, can you? And I'm not saying this as a joke. It's legal there. Do you smell marijuana like in the stands, or I mean, like how much of that is going on as you head into the stadium?
Jill's very aware of those sorts of things and has sensitivities in that regard that I don't, which means I can't ever do anything that she doesn't approve of. She's going to find out. We never smelled it in the stands when the game was going on, but during the break, there were definitely places where that aroma could be detected by almost anyone, including me.
Now, Ed, are you? I don't want you to share too much if you don't feel comfortable, but as you've made your way around Colorado, have you ever gone into, say, some sort of bakery or dispensary or something and seen some of these edibles? I think there are a lot of options these days, from what I'm told. Have you ever encountered any of this?
I have not. I have not gone into a dispensary. I've not been photographed outside of one, unlike some other people we may know. And as far as I know, I have never in my life used marijuana.
As far as you know. Are you trying to say, that you've never inhaled?
Somebody could put something in something I wasn't aware of.
I see. Hopefully that hasn't happened to you.
Never by my known choice have I used marijuana.
By the way, Frito, one final note here. Frito has some final thoughts he wanted to share. He believes Zeke today in his 9 carries for 8 yards, possibly distracted by the thought of weed being so close.
Say that again?
Frito wonders if Zeke was distracted by the thought of weed being so close to him.
But he had a great game in Seattle when he knew where it was.
And
he knew how close it was.
You did not embrace my recent religious humor involving Dean Blandino. Embrace Frito's marijuana jokes, please.
I don't think in his present circumstance, Zeke Elliott needs to be accused of anything more than he already stands accused of.
You think he already has enough issues? I think you're probably right, and they'll try to pick up the pieces, Ed, and we'll be ready to do this again. Anxious to get you back home with us in the greater Dallas area. But we appreciate everybody out there who has subscribed, more and more folks coming to the Doomsday podcast. Ed, one of the great things is, as I go around town, more and more people wanting to partner with us. And I think that is a good sign that folks want to be involved. And so we love our listeners, and there's so many different ways to do it. And you can subscribe for free, and whether you're Android, you can Google Play, Stitcher, all of that, or on iTunes or Apple Podcast, we call it. Subscribe for free, and I advise you to do that and become part of kind of the Doomsday family. I did want to say this. Chris Morris, our award-winning artist. Ed, I have told him at some point when he has time, and he doesn't have a lot of time, he is the artist, or he is the full-time illustrator for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. But I have asked him at some point, whether it be coffee mugs or T-shirts, to maybe start producing some
That would be nice.
some items. And I think for a very reasonable cost, we will make these available to our subscribers.
Yeah, he's by far our most talented employee as far as I'm concerned.
Boy, don't offend Frito like that. Frito.
Throwing no shade at Frito, who I think, like me, heard what you just said about all of these new financial streams we're tapping into and is expecting a little something, a little bump in the PayPal account this week.
I think I've told you. Ed,
I think I speak for Frito when I say that.
I'll just say, of all my employees right now, you were the last one who should be complaining.
Are you saying I'm your highest paid employee?
You're up there. But Frito is right there. It is neck and neck.
Well, and that's as it should be.
Yes.
If you're asking.
Yes. All right. Enjoyed
Not
it.
the Frito part, the part about me.
Exactly. All right. Be careful.
Frito's on his own.
Safe travels on the way home. Say goodnight to everyone.
Good night, Ed. Good night, everyone.
Good night. That was the Doomsday Podcast. We'll be back with you next week. Good night, everybody.
Well, the Christmas lights are shining, stockings have been hung. You're praying for your daughter, lighting candles for your son. They're living in the city now, you don't see them anymore. This year will not be like the ones before. And the streets are all but empty, the bars have all shut down, and it's hard to find a friend inside this godforsaken town. That emptiness, it feels from your head down to your toes. I'm sorry, baby, that's just the way it goes. Once you were a young girl with lovers by the score, money by the handful, you never wanted more. But they tend to leave you as time has its way. They may leave behind little mouths to feed and raise. And the days go by so slowly when it used to go so fast. Whiskey does not taste as good when you only pour one glass. There's just no way of knowing which way the cold wind blows. I'm sorry, baby, that's just the way it goes.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.